All right, hello and welcome everyone again. My name is Ayaj Rana. I'm a PhD student at the ILR School at Cornell University. Today I'm going to talk about one of my PhD research projects on gig work. That's what I'm focusing on at this moment. So, as my title reads, equilibrating the exchange, disintermediation in triadic labor markets of the remote gig economy. So I'm mostly focusing on the remote gig economy rather than just traditional gig work. By remote gig economy, I mean how the workers are being matched by like algorithmic uh, tools of platform organizations with employers from like in another region maybe. So, for example, that an example of that kind of work is what is called the organization's name Upwork. Upwork is a platform for example, for like graphic designers, software developers, even customer service representatives who outsource workers from different countries, and work employers maybe located in the US or in a Western country, whereas the workers can maybe located in South Asia, for example. All right, so a quick overview of the content that I'll be covering, the problem and my research question, then a little bit of theoretical background that I used in my research, the setting and design of my research. It's a mixed method research, so I will present my qualitative findings based on which I developed my hypothesis. Then the quantitative findings where I tested the hypothesis, finally some quick conclusions. All right, so how this, like, what is the problem then? The disintermediation I mentioned earlier. So what that is, um, disintermediation is something that happens in the triadic labor market relationships, especially when the employers and workers are matched by the intermediary, and then they know each other. They build the trust, they build kind of the relationship, and once they are matched, it is in their interest to kind of bypass the intermediate organizations. So why would they bypass the intermediate organizations to direct transactly? Because these intermediate organizations charge them for every transaction. For example, if you work on Upwork as a worker and you are working for an employer, Upwork will charge, for example, 20% each transaction that you do with your employer. So it is in their like in their interest for both employers, because the commission is for both employers and workers. So it is in the interest of both parties. Once they're being matched, they can kind of disintermediate the or intermediate organizations. But then again, the question remains, why would they do that? Because there might be several challenges, like for instance, scam or fraudulence or kind of labor violations, etc., for which these intermediate organizations offer protection for both parties so that they can do the transaction in a secure way. So as you can understand, this phenomenon has become a real challenge, and this has been a feature of triadic labor market relationships in the past, but there is a renewed interest because of the growth of these digital labor platform organizations, what I call DLMIs, digital labor market intermediary organizations. So this rapid growth is actually now leading a renewed interest both from scholars and practitioners, um, uh, because like this is making challenge for the platform organizations in terms of growth and sustainability, because their scholars have already documented the shutting down of platform organizations because of the disintermediation behavior. For example, the biggest labor market platforms in China is called ZBJ.com. So they did a survey and they found that around 90%, in around 19%, 90% cases, um, employers and workers, after being matched, they go off the platform. So that is how these organizations are losing a lot of revenue, and this is their business model actually. So this is a big problem for the organizations. Then it's also affecting the workers, because uh, these platforms are taking lots of like stringent measures to prevent the disintermediation attempts, and as a result they use algorithmic kind of surveillance, and algorithm is not always correct. It is making lots of mistakes when they attempt to kind of detect the disintermediation. For example, workers may face kind of penalty, and platforms use stringent penalty measures, for example suspending from the platform, banning the account, and restricting the account, things like that. So the platform's algorithmic management system makes mistakes in detecting this kind of behavior, and as a result workers, without any kind of fault, they also get penalized. So there is algorithmic precarity associated with the kind of the situation that workers are facing. Uh, so my question is, what drives workers like to disintermediate? Because they have lots of kind of opportunities on the platforms, and platforms are offering them various benefits, but still the disintermediation remains a big challenge. So why is that happening? And I am bringing that perspective mostly from workers. I'm focusing my studies about like workers. um, I'm not bringing kind of employer perspective here, because employers. So I'll tell more about why I'm focusing mostly on worker. But for now, that's the kind of the thing. So a little bit of theoretical background. So additionally, scholars mainly focused on the power relationship within this triadic labor market relationship, arguing that this intermediation is a power balancing behavior by the workers who are the least powerful within the triad, being the platform organization the most powerful, and employers in between. Sometimes people are also like scholars are also arguing that employers are equally powerful as platform organizations, but then again, workers are always the least powerful party within the triad. So the traditional like classic power dependence literature suggests that um, the least when there is a power imbalance, people will work together kind of within their network to go to the kind of the equilibrium that will balance out the power imbalance. So how does that happen? Because least powerful workers will leverage various relational connections. For example, here with the employer, when they continue to work with the same employer, they build trust, so they have some kind of leverage in terms of good relationship with the employer, and that is how their joint kind of connection, their joint power will eventually balance out the platform's power. So that's how scholars have traditionally kind of argued that this is a power balancing behavior. And there but the thing is like uh, the relationship is not necessarily always a power dependent relationship. Rather, recent research on gig work and also like in traditional employment relationship and organization research found that worker organization relationship is not only economic. There are other kind of embeddedness involved. Uh, and they may be embedded in social exchanges. By social exchanges, I mean their relationship is continuous, and there are socio-emotional investment within the relationship, because workers, even if the gig workers are traditionally like thought to be more in an arm length relationship, but then again, these platform workers are working for the same platform for over the years. Like for instance, I found cases of like more than 20 years of workers working on the same platform. So this relationship is beyond economic relationship. And scholars are kind of saying that there are relational infrastructures embedded within this relationship. And in addition to that, recent research also found no kind of unidirectional relationship between this intermediation and the power relationship. For example, research shows that this intermediation is positively associated with high dependence. On the other hand, some scholars also found that this intermediation is negatively associated with high dependence. So it's clear that the traditional power relation or power dependence theoretical lens is not offering the full picture, like full kind of comprehensive analytical lens to understand the disintermediation behavior. So here I bring the exchange scholarship, because although power and exchange theories share the same kind of theoretical pillar, which is mutual dependence, but then again, exchange theories are bringing more power to this relationship, because it exchange theory says that power is a latent potential. It's not necessary that power will always be exercised. For example, if you are embedded in a power relation with some kind of emotional investment there, the, the more powerful party may not always exercise the power on you, because they may love you, they may kind of feel for you. So even if they're holding more power, they will not exercise the power on you. So unlike the power dependence perspective, exchange theory says that the power is always a potential power. Then embeddedness shapes the dynamics of power dependence relationships, and that's how that will eventually affect the outcome of power dependence relationship. And rather than saying that this is a power dependent relationship, exchange scholars saying that the social exchange will become balanced or unbalanced based on the kind of the socio emotional investment within the relationship. So for example, in terms of organization or employment relationship literature, scholars often bring the two constructs, which are also relevant to traditional classic social exchange theory literature, that trust and mutual obligations are the two kind of key perspectives through which uh, these social exchanges take place. For example, if two parties are in a relationship of trust and mutual obligations, they will be able to do kind of favor to each other regardless of their power dependence relationship. And once the balance within these trust and obligations um, breaks, then kind of the relationship becomes unbalanced, and there will be self-interested opportunistic behavior by the person, by the actors who are subjected to that unbalanced social exchanges. So here, trust remains, like as I mentioned here, an important reference, but one of the important reference, and the psychological contract, which I say is kind of derived from the mutual obligation. So psychological contract is mostly used in employment relationship literature to suggest that employees will always kind of form a psychological contract with their employer or the organizations they work for, and that psychological contract, even if not recognized by the organizations, will affect their organizational behavior. So for example, workers are expecting something from their employers, even if that is not clearly mentioned in their contract, but then again, it is implied or perceived that they will be provided by the organizations. But then again, if that is not happening, they will be feeling a breach in their psychological contract, which will eventually affect their organization behavior. All right, so I therefore kind of frame the disintermediation behavior more of an outcome of exchange relationship rather than a power dependence relationship. So to bring empirical evidence there, I studied workers from two platforms. I am using their pseudonyms here, PrimePitch and Basic Bits. These are the two platform organizations. As you can see here, PrimePitch is a more high value organization and is in business for much longer years than Basic Bits. And also here, as you can see, PrimePitch, although the categories of services offered on both platforms are almost similar, PrimePitch's employers are kind of spending much money on the platforms. For example, average employer spending on PrimePitch is about $5,000 a year on hiring workers, whereas it's 200 for Basic Bits worker employers. Although the number of active employers on Basic Bits are much higher. So just to give you an idea of how these two platforms compare and contrast, the Prime page is for more skilled, uh, in like as reflected through the average employer spending, as you can see, and on the other spectrum, uh, I find just the circumvention policy. For instance, the last kind of the indicator here, as you can see, so prime pitch, the circumvention policy is actually the disintermediate, whether they allow the disintermediation phenomenon. So prime pitch allows workers and employers, after spending 2 years of the relationship on the platform, you can take the relationship off the platform without any penalty, without any kind of problem. But basic bits always prohibit that kind of behavior. So on basic bits, workers and employers have to always work on the platform. But prime pitch allows you to kind of disintermediate after 2 years. Um, so my research design, I interviewed workers from Bangladesh, which is one of the kind of top 10 countries of freelance worker supplier for both platforms. And these are the two global platforms, the top, like among the top 5 global platforms. I interviewed workers, and then I collected archival data from the platform's discussion boards. This is not specific to Bangladesh, rather this platform messages are posted by workers from all around the world. So I scrapped around 43,000 text messages from PrimePage and around 26,000 text messages from basic bits discussion boards. And these offered really rich kind of insights from workers experience and their well-being on the platform. And then observation, I also was a registered user for both platforms to understand the organizational processes, how workers interact with the kind of employers. And I hired two workers actually to understand how that process works. And I also attended several kind of online webinars organized by both country worker leaders as well as like the platform companies that were kind of done centrally. So these three sources are the sources of my qualitative analysis based on which I developed hypotheses. And then I did my quantitative analysis through a survey of about 700 workers from Bangladesh in collaboration with an NGO that work for the development of freelance workers with the support from the government. So my qualitative findings suggest that there are two big factors that actually are associated with workers' organized disintermediation behavior. First is organizational distrust, which is due to algorithmic precarity resulting from the erroneous and unfair kind of algorithmic control practices by both platforms. In many cases, workers reported that they didn't do the wrong, still they were penalized by the platform's algorithm. And when they report this to the human managers of the platform, they didn't get the service they expected. And that's why I say they also experienced uncaring human-directed control practices. And eventually, they also, in several occasions, workers reported that there was a big kind of gap between these two control practices by the organizations, saying that when algorithm is doing something and I'm reporting to the human managers and they are saying that no, that is not happening. So there was some kind of imbalance between the two control systems. Interestingly, I observed pretty much similar kind of experience of workers from both organizations, and that's why I say here is low or almost no organizational variation in terms of organizational distrust of workers, and therefore I hypothesize that as organizational distrust increases, the likelihood of workers engaging in disintermediation also increases for both organizations. My second finding was from the qualitative findings was psychological contract breaches, which were mostly due to 8 overarching factors that workers were expecting from the organizations, but they are not provided. For example, fair opportunities for regular earnings, balanced power between workers and employers, because sometimes some employers were also abusing workers, taking advantage of the platform's organizational structure, which is favoring the employers over the workers. Then compensation in case of labor violations. They're expecting this fair dispute resolution when there is some kind of conflict with employers. Workers will generally expect that the platform will help them in that kind of situation. Accountability and transparency in management control systems, space for worker voice, effective human-directed management, because they expect that algorithm will make mess. But then again, human managers should kind of jump in and help them. And then opportunities professional growth. Interestingly, I found high organizational variation along this finding because I found that prime pitch workers were more likely to report these psychological contract breaches than basic bitch workers. Therefore, I hypothesize that psychological contract breach is positively associated with the disintermediation behavior for prime pitch workers, but not for the basic bitch workers. And then again, literature suggests that psychological contract breach is also kind of affecting trust. So I argue that this psychological contract breach will mediate the effect of distrust on disintermediation behavior of prime pitch. Then again, such an evidence is absent for basic breach. So why this high organizational variation is happening, I will offer additional supplementary analysis to discuss that. But for now, let's focus on my quantitative findings based on the survey that I did. So as you can see here, my dependent variable here is the disintermediation behavior, like whether workers are likely to disintermediate. That is what I did based on a vignette design, because the existing scholarship suggests that it's really difficult to observe disintermediation because like workers are unwilling to report that because of obvious reasons of like, because that's prohibited by the platform. So I did a vignette design to understand, to kind of measure the disintermediation attempt. So that's a simple logistic regression that I did. And here, as you can see, organizational distrust is kind of significant for both platforms. And then the model 2 and model 5 shows psychological contract breach in support of my hypothesis is significant for prime pitch, but it's not significant for basic bits. So when I add psychological contract breach to the first model, here I see that mediates psychological contract breaches mediate the effect of organizational distrust on disintermediation behavior for prime pitch, but such a mediation effect is also absent for basic bids, because as you can see, the organizational distrust coefficients remain almost the same with same robustness for the basic bids. All right, so my supplementary analysis suggests that why psychological contract breach is more important to the prime pitch workers, because prime pitch workers are are more skilled. They are more invested in the platforms. They are more kind of, for example, they argue that they say that we are bringing more revenue for the platforms because our projects are high value projects. We are working with Fortune 500 companies, and that's how our project is. For example, $1,000 project, like for 2 or 3 or 4 hours. So 20% of that would go to the platform. So we should be offered something in return. Therefore, when they do not do that for us, we feel that the breach in that reciprocity. So my hypothesis was prime pitch workers are more skilled, and also prime pitch platform is offering better working conditions. So that is kind of uh, establishing the psychological contract for the skilled workers in the first place as well. As you can see here, in terms of his skill and competence, the skill variety is high. Prime pitch workers use high kind of artificial intelligence tools, techniques in their work as a measure, as a proxy measure for the skill competence. And in terms of labor violations, they report less labor violations. In terms of worker-employer balance, which is really, really critical to the whole kind of triadic relationship, that is also very high for prime pitch workers. So conclusions, so quick takeaways are workers still engage in disintermediation as a strategy to navigate their powerlessness, but that powerlessness is not necessarily the factor of like the power dependence, rather it's a factor of the unbalanced social exchange. And that unbalanced social exchange happens when the organizations kind of violate the reciprocity norms perceived by the workers. Thank you. I'm looking forward to your questions, comments, feedback.